But yeah, so I think hopefully that covers how all of these just pertain to any one of these individual channels. When we get back to the channel strip, the other thing that I'll say, the other important buttons here is that you have probably the most important one is this mute button. And if you press the mute button, that takes them out, that takes their, obviously mutes them. The other one is the solo button. So when you hit the solo button, that means that in the headphones, when you're listening to it, it will just isolate just that channel so you can hear, you can do tweaks either with the equalizer and various other things and try to hear how it sounds. Now, there are limitations to this though, because if something sounds great in solo, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to sound great in the mix overall. Use solo sparingly, but that's what that button is. And if if something doesn't sound right in the microphones, you can always look over here, right above the left-right channel, there's a clear solo. So if you hit this button here, the channel 1 with Dicho is taken out, and now you're listening to the main mix again. So again, just as a brief review, on channels 1 through 16, at least at Hebron, we have the worship team. On channels 17 through 32, we have just on 18 through 21, we just have the pastor mics and other handhelds, and then we have the computer coming through on the third row on aux 1, and then we also have some effects which we will talk about a little bit later. Next part that I will talk about that's probably of some importance here is this section here. This is the buses. What is a bus and why does the bus matter? So over here we have the left-right channel, which is the main outputs, output 15 and 16. Over here, if we go to bus 1 through 8, so for the worship team when they're on Sundays, because of their placement of the speakers, they are actually more in the back and the speakers are pointing out more towards the congregation. So as a result, they're not really going to be able to hear what they're actually playing. As a result, they have an in-ear monitor system that they just have. We are able to independently control what the praise team hears differently. So then the next logical question is, well, what exactly is the praise team hearing then, right? From here, how you select that is that you would hit this select button. Then you would hit this button here. This is very important, the sends on fader. When you hit sends on fader, if we go back to the channel 1 through 16, which is where the rest of the praise team is, you will see that this looks very different than what you were seeing before. So I will go back here. If I press this sends on fader, you can see that this switched back to what we had before. So what this translates meaning is that what is being sent to the praise team is separate from what the house mix is seeing. So I probably went out of order, but a bus is basically just an alternative mix separate from the main mix, and you can control that independently. So going back to this review, so if you want to go back to see what the praise team is doing, you hit bus 1 through 8, you hit monitor, and you can hit sends on fader, and then you can adjust these accordingly. One thing that I will mention in particular is that when I will hit a sends on fader to go back to the main mix, so I still have bus number 1 for the monitor still selected. So when I go up to the home and I go over to config, so I'll hit page over 1, like that, you will see right here, this says pre-fader. So what that means is that anything here, whatever I manipulate here on the main mix, it will actually not have any influence on what the bus mix will be, right? But if you have, say, the live stream, so if I hit 9 through 16 and the red ones, we have a live stream. So if I go to the live stream over here, you can see here that on the same portion here we have post fader, meaning that whatever manipulations that make the house mix, the same manipulations will also influence what the live stream shows. So if I go back to here, bus 9 through 16, the stream mix in the left and right, if I hit sends on fader, you can see how this looks very different, where I basically have everything at unity here, basically completely replicating what the house mix is doing. But if for whatever reason, let's just say in the pads, I wanted the pads to be always quieter than what the main mix would be, I would then redo this down here. No matter what, relatively speaking, it's always going to be lower relative to the main mix. And to make that adjustment here, if you ever wanted to, you would then move this button here. Either you want to pre or post fader, then click the button in, and that's how you would change it from there. If you're in a situation where if I just hit out a sends on fader and then I go back to the worship team on monitor 1, if say that if I hit sends on fader, if the worship team ever said, hey, can you raise the electric for me, then you would just manipulate this up or down and whatnot, and then once you're done, you would want to hit sends on fader, so that if you want to manipulate the house mix, that you're not getting too confused. I'll admit I've done it plenty of times. Beyond that, from here, the other important buttons here is this mute group. So 1, so if this is set for channels 1 through 16. So if I hit this mute group 1 here, you will see that these will light up. So I'll back up for a second here. So if I press this button here, you can see that this is muting everything across the board. The only other thing I guess that's worth mentioning here from everything that I know, I guess we'll be going back to, I mentioned before, the effects. So effects are basically reverb, echoes, and everything else like that. The reason why you will want to do that is that when you get the signal coming in through the system, everything will sound very hollow. And because when we're in person, we hear a lot of the voices and instruments reverberating and bouncing off the walls and everything else. So it sounds natural. But when you are on a, say, an online service, you're not necessarily going to hear that. So you have to add back that reverb or the reverberations in the room. So how I have that set up is that if I go to effects over here, on bus number 13, I have a chamber reverb. I have a few other things which I can go over in just a little bit, but over here, that is what channel 13 is doing. So if you wanted to add effects or any other reverbs or other sounds into the mix, into the main mix, what you would have to then do is you would have to press the proper channel strips. You would then select bus number 13, which is the effects number 1. Then you would hit send on fader, and then we can see here, basically everybody is getting about even amounts of reverb through there. So, but just because you did that, that is just sending to the bus. You have to tell where the bus needs to go. So then when you go back to the this row, the aux row over here, you have the other various effects. So if you wanted to add the reverb in, then you would need to turn those up to your taste, and then when you hear the distinction there, that'll be a lot louder. My one general tip of advice is that somebody from the praise team is just talking, saying about, you know, call to worship and, you know, just prayers and everything else. You're probably going to want to turn this down, only because reverb on a talking voice just sounds really weird, but without it for a worship session, it just doesn't sound as good. So that's the portion that I'll mention over there. Lastly, the only other thing that I can really think of is looking over here back at the screen for the routing. Maybe this may require a separate video, or you can just ask me separately, but you can see here that in these red ones here in buses 11 and 12, I have stream left and stream right, and I'm doing that separately from the house mix because during the live stream, I'm trying to avoid clipping, so I just have it a little bit lower. I do have a limiter, and we can talk about that a little bit later, but I just have the live stream always a little bit softer than what the house mix is, only because I'm just trying to avoid the clipping. So how do we make it such that the house that we are making bus 11s and 12s the live stream mix? So when I go over here, I am paging over until I get to the outputs, and so over here I have output 1 and 2, right? And this one's saying here that for output 1 I have, you can see here, the stream left and stream right, but the question is, how did I get that to be like that to begin with? So I'll tell you. So we have to go page back over onto card, and on the card, because there's on the back of here, you will see that there is a if I'm doing this right, there is a little USB cable that connects to the computer. But right over here, we are telling the X32 that we want to customize what we want our user out to be 1 through 8, because the default position is to have something local, and that's not what we want to do. So we are pre-selecting user out 1 and 2. So when we go back to our outputs, we can then manipulate right here, and then we can then, once we get here, we can then change this dial here to be whatever we want it to be. Okay, so that's kind of the how we adjust that. So if for whatever reason in the future you want to troubleshoot it, that's one of the areas to also look into as well. This is kind of a really long rant. I hope this is not confusing, but this is basically everything that I understand of how to work the X32 and as it pertains to volunteers, Sunday services, and whatnot. So what would we do on a normal Sunday? So we will come over here. We would then turn on the sound rack. We would then press this button here, turn this button also on as well. This powers this whole unit here. And then after that, we would then do the various mic checks, adjusting what we need to do. If the signal for any one of these mics, when they're doing a sound check, they're not good enough, we then turn up the gain. If you get feedback, then we pull back on the gain, and then from there, when the worship team is playing, I'm just adjusting, you know, the relative loudness of every single one of these channels, trying to be that good traffic cop again, and trying to avoid clipping from the digital clipping, as that's not helpful. I'll make sure that the main house mix is at unity at 0, and I won't really touch that at all for the most part. And then if there's any various frequencies such as boominess or other things that I don't like, I'll either go to the equalizer to to boost or cut some of those signals. I'll then adjust whether they need a low cut to cut out the lower frequency if it's not very helpful. If I'm trying to work with the pastor's mic or one of the vocalists, I may add a compressor to again squash down the dynamic range to make the average loudness sound a little bit nicer. I may play around with the panning left and right and all those other things to make it sound like a wider soundscape. And then the whole during any of the when the worship team is playing, I'll raise and lower things relative to what I can hear and what I'm trying to make the distinctions for. Play around with the panning left and right to make it, like I said before. And yeah, that's basically about it.